There is a high probability that the small battery in your smartphone contains lithium from Chilean deposits, Indonesian nickel, as well as cobalt mined in Congolese mines controlled by the Chinese and employing local children. Critical minerals and rare earth metals have today become the central point of geopolitical rivalry between powers, because whoever controls critical minerals controls the future. You can't produce clean energy without dirty extractive industry. These words from the director of Advanced Magnet Lab perfectly capture the paradox of our times. On one hand, we talk about decarbonization and green transformation. On the other, we need unprecedented exploitation of natural resources to achieve this. One electric car requires 6 times more minerals than a combustion engine vehicle, and a wind farm requires 9 times more than a gas power plant. In just 2 years, between 2021 and 2023, the prices of lithium carbonate, a key element for the electric revolution, increased by over 400%, only to then fall by 80%. This dramatic change not only shook the automotive market, but also signaled the beginning of a new era of geopolitical competition for resources. New points of leverage appeared on the world map: the lithium triangle in South America, cobalt mines in the heart of Africa, or Indonesian nickel deposits. Without these raw minerals, there are no modern smartphones or electric cars. We are witnessing a fundamental change. It is no longer just oil and gas, but metals are also becoming the fuel of the 21st century. Control over the extraction, processing, and distribution of critical minerals is now drawing new front lines in the global competition for dominance. And in this battle, there is one clear leader: China, which today controls 70% of global rare earth metal production, and more than half of the processing capacity for lithium, nickel, and cobalt. How did the communist giant come to monopolize the market for the resources of the future? How is the West trying to reverse this situation? And what does all this mean for the green transformation that Europe has committed to? Welcome to the 20s Report. After a series of revisions, the US and Ukraine have reached an agreement on rare earth metals. Lithium, cobalt, and titanium are just some of the riches that could change the balance of power in the global economy. At a time when the commodities market is becoming a new arena for international competition, it is worth considering your own investment strategy. XTB app, partner of our channel, offers access to a wide range of investment instruments, including shares in raw material companies and ETFs related to the commodity sector. Keeping the risks in mind, take advantage of global trends and invest in over 5,400 stocks and ETFs from around the world, with 0% commission for monthly turnover up to 100,000 euros. And if you need support in taking your first steps, XTB offers a free educational package with materials that will allow you to gain or expand your knowledge of investing at every stage of your journey. Check out XTB's offer with a free demo account. By clicking on the link in the description, you support the development of our channel. Critical minerals and rare earth metals are terms that have dominated headlines in recent years. Today, no one doubts how important these raw materials are as element in the global competition for influence. But what exactly are we talking about? Why are critical minerals and rare earth metals so important? Let's start with definitions. According to the US Energy Act of 2020, critical minerals are resources of key importance to the economy and national security of the United States. For a mineral to be considered critical, it must meet 3 key conditions. First, it must be essential for the economic and national security of the United States. Second, it must serve an essential function in the manufacturing of a product, the absence of which would have significant consequences for US economic or national security. And third, the supply chain for such a mineral is vulnerable to disruption. For this reason, critical minerals include lithium, cobalt, platinum, graphite, titanium, and rare earth metals, among others. Importantly, fossil fuels and uranium do not belong to this group. The United States Geological Survey maintains a list of these key minerals, which currently includes 50 items and is updated every 3 years. Each time their importance in various sectors of the economy is taken into account. The last such list was published in 2022. Already in the 20th century, Americans recognized the growing importance of mineral resources in a globalizing world. The outbreak of World War II and the associated problems with raw material supplies prompted Congress to enact the Strategic and Critical Minerals Stockpiling Act. This act aimed to secure critical minerals necessary for national defense. Nevertheless, the development of technology and changing industry needs, especially in the defense, advanced consumer technology and energy sectors, have led to a revival of interest in minerals without which participation in the great power game would not be possible. As mentioned before, rare earth elements are included among critical minerals, another group of resources that have gained prominence in recent years. This is a group of 17 metals, comprising 2 scandium group elements, scandium and yttrium, as well as all lanthanides, for example, lanthanum, neodymium or erbium. In essence, these are metals that coexist in minerals and have similar chemical properties. And these properties are unique, which makes these elements applicable in the production of magnets, displays, batteries and catalysts, among other things. The name rare earths has its roots in the 18th century, when chemists called difficult to dissolve and melt oxides earths. In reality, these were metal oxides that we know now as rare earth elements. In those times, however, these metals were unknown, hence the term earths, meaning solid, heavy and resistant to processing. The name, although enigmatic for most, has survived to this day. Interestingly, many of these elements are not so rare in terms of their occurrence in the Earth's crust. The average concentration is 150 to 200 ppm, which is higher than the concentration of copper or zinc. The problem is that they are very dispersed, and it is not easy to find a concentration large enough to make extraction economically justified. But it is precisely this dispersion that makes us perceive them as rare. World REE resources are estimated at about 120 million tons, with the largest deposits amounting to 44 million tons located in China. The extraction of rare earth metals is associated with serious ecological problems. Mining processes release harmful radionuclides, such as thorium and uranium, which pose a threat to human health and the environment. Mines emit dust and heavy metals that pollute the air and soil. Solid waste dumps are also created, which constitute a long-term source of pollution. The extraction and processing of REEs are very energy-intensive, which contributes to global warming. Moreover, opening new mines, usually open pit, leads to the degradation of natural ecosystems and the extinction of species. Thus, the benefits derived from obtaining rare earth metals come at significant environmental costs. As emphasized by Mark Senti, CEO of Advanced Magnet Lab Incorporated, a company producing magnets, you can't produce clean energy without the extractive industry. That's just the reality. The industry, which as we see, is very dirty. This refreshing thesis is of course a paradox in the context of a global pursuit of a clean and green future. Despite these problems, it is clear that the demand for critical minerals will only grow. The transformation of energy systems toward clean technologies significantly increases the demand for critical minerals. Compared to traditional hydrocarbon-based systems, technologies such as photovoltaic power plants, wind farms, and electric vehicles require much larger quantities of mineral resources. The World Bank, in its report Minerals for Climate Action, estimates that the production of minerals such as graphite, lithium, and cobalt may increase by up to 500% by 2050, to meet the needs of clean energy technologies. In total, more than 3 billion tons of minerals and metals will be needed to implement wind, solar and geothermal energy, as well as energy storage technologies necessary to achieve climate goals. Let's translate these abstract numbers into concrete examples. The production of one electric car consumes 6 times more minerals than a combustion engine car, and an onshore wind power plant needs 9 times more minerals than a gas power plant. Exactly are used to produce an electric car? In the case of the Mustang Mach-E, the following is needed: 66 kilograms of graphite, 53 kilograms of copper, almost 40 kilograms of nickel, 24.5 kilograms of manganese, over 13 kilograms of cobalt, almost 9 kilograms of lithium, and smaller amounts of rare earth metals, zinc and other raw materials. As the energy transformation progresses, the energy-related sector is becoming the main driver of demand for critical minerals. Between 2010 and 2019, the average mineral demand for new power generation units increased by 50%, which was related to the development of renewable energy sources. According to the forecasts of the International Energy Agency, by 2040, the share of clean energy technologies in the total demand for minerals will increase to over 40% for copper and rare earth elements, 60 to 70% for nickel and cobalt, and almost 90% for lithium. Therefore, the green energy transformation, so enthusiastically promoted worldwide, contains a fascinating paradox. On one hand, there is a drive to decarbonize economies and move away from fossil fuels. On the other hand, this same transformation requires an unprecedented intensification of mineral and metal extraction. Therefore, when we have minerals that are essential for the development of a new branch of the economy, for which demand is expected to rise sharply in the coming years, while their supply is limited for many reasons, it becomes clear that we have a resource that all the major geopolitical players want to control. A new battlefield is being created. Control over critical minerals and REE supply chains takes on strategic importance, and states strive to secure their interests in the face of growing competition. In the 20th century, the front lines of international rivalry ran through the oil fields of the Middle East, Siberia's gas deposits, and the extraction platforms of the Gulf of Mexico, because it was oil and natural gas that shaped the global balance of power. Today we are witnessing a fundamental change. It is no longer only hydrocarbons, but also metals that are becoming the key element of the geopolitical puzzle. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite, copper, and rare earth metals – these are the new fuel of the digital age and green transformation. So what does the new map of critical minerals look like? Let's start with South America. Here beats the heart of the lithium triangle: Chile, Argentina and Bolivia. More than 55% of the world's lithium resources come from here. Chile, thanks to the salt deserts like Salar de Atacama, is one of the largest exporters of lithium. Bolivia, on the other hand, is estimated to possess the world's largest resources of this metal, over 21 million tons, although it is still developing its extraction capabilities. This is a region with enormous potential, but also political instability that affects the pace of investment. Africa is virtually a resource Eldorado and an arena for strategic power games. For example, the Democratic Republic of Congo accounts for as much as 74% of global cobalt extraction, which has largely been taken over by the Chinese, who have invested billions of dollars there. Meanwhile, Namibia, South Africa and Madagascar are becoming important suppliers of graphite, manganese and rare earth elements. Africa has resources, but it is not Africa that decides what happens to them. Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia and the Philippines, are today the biggest players in the nickel market. Indonesia produced as much as 2.2 million tons in 2024. That's more than half of the global supply. Thanks to the ban on ore exports and the requirement for local processing, the country has gained an advantage not only in raw materials but also in industry. This is an example of a wise, though protectionist, resource policy. Finally, we come to China, which is a veritable hegemon of this sector. This country currently controls almost 75% of global rare earth metal production and over 50% of global lithium, cobalt, and nickel refining capacity. On this foundation, the Chinese have achieved an advantage in processing technology. Therefore, in December 2023, Beijing introduced a ban on the export of know-how regarding the separation and refining of rare earth metals, securing its monopoly. It was a well-thought-out strategic move. North America and Europe are trying to catch up. The USA has resumed REE extraction in California, Mountain Pass. Canada is investing in lithium projects in Quebec, and Norway and Finland are looking for their own sources of cobalt and nickel. But this is still a drop in the ocean dominated by the Chinese. The new resource map of the world does not resemble the old one, the oil map. Today, instead of the Middle East, we have the Andes, Central Africa, or the Malay Archipelago, while laboratories in China are gaining strategic importance. One might ask, where in all this is the European Union? Europe, in its pursuit of green transformation, has found itself trapped in dependence on China, and the elements essential for the production of wind turbines and magnets have become a new form of geopolitical leverage. For years, the Union has lagged behind, but recently it has been trying to catch up in the competition for critical raw materials. When the global market shifted from the era of hydrocarbons to the era of minerals essential for green transformation, European decision-makers understood that decisive action was needed. That is why, in response to growing geopolitical and economic pressure, the European Commission in May 2024 introduced a new instrument, the Critical Raw Materials Act, which aims to diversify sources of critical raw materials, strengthen the European supply chain, and increase investment in recycling and processing technologies. Thanks to this, the EU wants to reduce its dependence primarily on Beijing. But the EU's actions are not limited to legislation. In March 2025, the European Commission published a list of 47 strategic projects, which we see on this map. It is a kind of recovery plan aimed at strengthening European extraction, processing, and recycling potential. One of the largest investments is a battery metal refining plant, Pole Vault, in Zawiercie, Poland. The $800 million investment by Elemental Group aims to recover lithium, nickel, cobalt, and copper, among others, from electronic waste. A particular concentration of extraction and processing projects can be seen on the Iberian Peninsula, in France, Belgium, and Germany, as well as in the north of the continent. So the EU is not remaining passive. Through the introduction of Critical Raw Materials Act and the implementation of strategic projects, the European Union is trying to redefine its place on the new resource map. This is further evidence that resource geopolitics is a field where what counts is not only access to deposits, but above all the ability to process and manage the entire supply chain. The still ongoing war in Ukraine played also a significant role in this European surge, which not only disrupted global supply chains, but also became a catalyst for rapid reforms in the critical mineral sector. In this context, it is worth mentioning that Ukraine itself has REE deposits, which even became the subject of peace negotiations. Although, as it later turned out, their scale may have been drastically overestimated. Nevertheless, on February 3, 2025, Donald Trump stated that he wants to gain access to Ukrainian rare earth mineral resources in exchange for military and financial support, which he initially valued at $500 billion. The figure is far from accurate, but ultimately both sides reached an agreement. New mining projects, including those involving critical minerals, will be implemented in Ukraine with American participation. The Americans are also attempting to get their way via the Democratic Republic of Congo. This Central African country is full of contradictions: poverty, instability, and conflict on the one hand, and absolute dominance when it comes to cobalt on the other. Over 70% of the world's production of this key resource comes from here. However, the biggest external player in the DRC is of course China. Already in the first decade of the 21st century, Beijing began an offensive, buying shares in key mines. State giants like China Molybdenum operated there, which today control over 60% of cobalt mining in Democratic Republic of Congo. In exchange for concessions, Congo received Chinese investments in infrastructure, roads, hospitals, energy. This was the Minerals for Development model, a model paid for by the back-breaking work of locals. This is how Vince Beiser writes about work conditions in Congolese mines in the book Power Metal, the race for the resources that will shape the future. The worst mines in the DRC are as if taken straight from a nightmare. The giant corporations selling products containing Congolese cobalt are worth trillions, and yet the people who extract cobalt from the ground barely make ends meet, living in extreme poverty and immense suffering, writes researcher Sidara Kara. They exist on the edge of human life in an environment that is treated as a toxic dump by foreign mining companies. The most shocking conditions prevail in relatively small, unauthorized mines called artisanal. It is estimated that about 200,000 people work in such places, providing approximately 15 to 20% of the total national cobalt production. Men dressed only in shirts, t-shirts and flip-flops with flashlights attached to their heads spend entire days in deep, cramped underground tunnels, extracting cobalt using hand tools. Helmets or protective glasses are rarely seen accessories. The dangerous dust they inhale is the least of their worries. This is a sobering background for the great power competition taking place in the foreground. Washington is also not indifferent. In recent years, the American administration, as well as companies such as Tesla and Ford, have begun to intensively search for alternatives, both in terms of sources of raw materials and ways to secure them. The Biden administration launched a fund supporting investments in Africa, also to regain influence lost to China. Washington also tried to indirectly interfere in Congolese contracts, pressing for renegotiations of Chinese agreements as well as an audit of the prominent Sino-Congolese agreement concluded in 2008 between the DRC government and China. In essence, this agreement concerned the exchange of natural resources for infrastructure expenditures. As a result, Chinese companies became owners of 15 of the 19 best cobalt and copper deposits in the country. And let's remember that cobalt is essential for the production of batteries for electric cars, smartphones, or energy storage systems. No wonder there is a global battle for control over its source. And so no one in the industry has any illusions that China is the undisputed leader in the critical minerals market. This position results from a combination of abundant natural resources, advanced technology, and less rigorous environmental and labor regulations, which allows for more efficient and cheaper production. However, it should be noted that Beijing's current success is also the effect of cold calculation, long-term planning, and investments counted in tens of billions of dollars. Today, Beijing controls almost 70% of global rare earth metal production. In the case of graphite, it's already over 78%. And when it comes to the refining of lithium, nickel or cobalt, China has more than half of the world's processing capacity under control. This is not an advantage, this is full dominance. How it is possible that China has surpassed the West by decades in this strategic race? In February 2025, Beijing once again reminded the world of its significance by introducing export restrictions on 5 key metals, including tungsten, which is extremely important for the American defense industry. In April, China implemented stringent export controls on an additional 7 critical REEs. This was a powerful reaction to Trump's tariffs. Undoubtedly, it was a show of strength. China is also the world leader in battery production, especially lithium-ion batteries. Currently, they produce more than 3/4 of batteries sold worldwide. The largest producers are giants such as CATL and BYD. Moreover, Beijing accounts for almost 90% of global installed production capacity for cathode minerals and over 97% of production capacity for anode minerals, the key battery components that enable energy flow. In the book The War Below, Lithium, Copper and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives, author Ernest Scheider describes China's advantage in lithium-ion battery production as follows. In 2021, China built or was building 148 of the world's 200 existing gigafactories producing lithium-ion batteries. Of these, 21 are in Europe and 11 in North America. By 2049, China wants to launch another 101 such facilities on its territory out of 136 planned. But China is not only operating domestically. The famous Belt and Road Initiative, a huge infrastructure and economic program initiated by Xi Jinping, has become a vehicle for expansion in resource sector as well. In 2024, Chinese investments in the metals and mining sector under this initiative reached a record $21.4 billion. That's more than ever before. Most of these funds go to Latin America, Indonesia, and above all, to Africa. In Africa alone, investments increased by more than 30% in 2024, reaching almost $30 billion. In these areas, Chinese companies not only extract cobalt, lithium and copper, they also build roads, railways, power plants, thus entire ecosystems that tie local economies to Beijing. It is worth adding that they not only invest but also restrict access to know-how. In December 2023, China introduced a ban on the export of rare earth metal processing technology. This was a clear signal. We control the supply chain, from the mine to the finished component. In the face of Chinese dominance in critical raw materials, therefore an industry that shapes the future of the world, the United States is taking a series of actions to level the playing field. The turning point was the Joe Biden administration's decision to prioritize domestic production of raw materials, crucial for energy transformation and national security. The first step was the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which, in addition to enormous investments in green energy, mandated that components of electric vehicles and batteries come from the USA or partner countries. This means one thing: America must produce its own critical minerals and should do it quickly. Almost simultaneously, Biden activated the Defense Production Act, a Cold War-era law that allows the government to directly invest in key sectors. Thanks to it, the Department of Defense began financing the development of domestic extraction of lithium, cobalt, or neodymium. Finally, the CHIPS and Science Act, enacted the same year, although mainly known for investments in semiconductors, also includes billions of dollars for research on new materials and alternatives to difficult-to-access raw materials. Specific investments also followed the new regulations. In 2022, the Biden administration provided $35 million in funding to MP Materials project for processing heavy rare earth metals in Mountain Pass, California, which is the first such installation in the USA. China controls most of the global market for these minerals. We cannot build a future that is made in America if we ourselves are dependent on China for the minerals that power products of today and tomorrow, said Joe Biden in February 2022. But the United States doesn't want to act alone. In Texas, a REE processing plant funded by the Department of Defense is being built, which, run by the Australian company Lynas Rare Earths, will be the first such facility outside China with a full production cycle. In parallel, in Arkansas, the Canadian company Standard Lithium is developing a project to extract lithium from natural brines, an alternative to traditional mining, much less invasive for the environment. In January 2025, the project received as much as $225 million in support from the Department of Energy. Washington knows that it is impossible to completely cut off from the world. Therefore, the United States established the Minerals Security Partnership, an international alliance with countries possessing resources and know-how. Under the MSP, the USA cooperates with Australia, Canada, Japan, the EU and South Korea to build common supply chains, free from Beijing's influence. An interesting example here is Canada, which in the fall of 2024 announced an ambitious plan to become the first commercial source of rare earth elements in North America. At that time, the already existing Saskatchewan Research Council REE processing and production facility began commercial-scale production. The plan is for this unit to produce 400 tons of neodymium-praseodymium annually. This is a quantity sufficient to produce 500,000 electric vehicles. It is worth adding that the facility also intends to process samarium, essential for the production of F-35 fighters, in an amount covering 25% of North America's needs. In addition to building mines and processing plants, the United States is also investing in future technologies. The Department of Energy created the Critical Minerals Innovation Hub, a research center that deals with recycling used batteries and searching for substitutes for the most difficult to access raw materials. It is also worth mentioning that work is underway on alternative methods of obtaining REE compared to traditional extraction. One promising concept is recovering these elements from coal ash. This method allows for the use of existing waste, reducing the need to open new mines. Research conducted by the University of Texas at Austin has shown that coal ash, which is a residue from coal combustion, contains significant amounts of rare earth elements. In the United States, about 1,800 million tons of coal ash have been accumulated over decades, of which about 70% is potentially recoverable. It is estimated that this ash contains about 11 million tons of REE, which is almost 8 times the current US domestic reserves. The value of these elements is estimated at $8.4 billion US. Another way to obtain REE is also recycling electronic waste, which constitutes a valuable secondary source of rare earth elements. Research is also being conducted in this area. Today, no one in the USA has any doubts. Control over strategic raw materials is a matter of national security. Will America manage to dethrone China? This is far from happening, but the fact is that the USA has returned to the game. Now let's investigate lithium for a moment. In recent years, the market related to this raw material has experienced a real roller coaster. In the years 2021-2023, lithium carbonate prices increased by over 400%, reaching record levels in November 2022, when more than $80,000 was paid per ton. This sharp increase resulted from the growing demand for electric cars and energy storage systems. Battery producers, fearing shortages, began to massively accumulate stocks, which further drove prices up. But already in 2023, there was a collapse. Prices fell by as much as 80% within a few months. Why? First, the market became saturated with inventory. Second, demand in China, which is the main consumer of lithium, began to slow down due to economic deceleration and a decline in EV sales. This was compounded by a global increase in supply. Australia, Chile and China increased extraction and new mining projects began to enter the market. This shows how unstable and susceptible to speculation the lithium market is, a raw material that will be one of the pillars of energy transformation in the coming decades. Projections indicate that by 2030, lithium demand will increase 3.5-fold, and by 2034, nearly by 7-fold. There is a risk that the supply of lithium will not meet the growing demand. Already by 2029, a deficit may occur that will hinder energy transformation. For comparison, in a single year up to 2029, more lithium will be needed than was extracted in the years 2015 to 2022. Currently, lithium production is dominated by 4 countries: Australia, Chile, China and Argentina. Australia is the leader in lithium ore extraction, but China controls a significant part of the supply chain, processing the raw material. Lithium extraction takes place mainly from ores, 66%, and brines, 34%. Australia specializes in ores, while South America specializes in brines. The United States, once an important lithium producer, currently accounts for more than 1% of global production. However, it aims to increase domestic extraction to reduce dependence on imports. The growing demand for lithium requires sustainable methods of extraction and recycling to ensure the stability of supply of this strategic raw material. As electric vehicles and battery storage systems become dominant forces in the energy transition, they are rapidly emerging as the primary consumers of lithium and other critical minerals. In the global push to reduce emissions, ensuring the resilience and security of energy systems is no longer just a technical challenge. It is a strategic imperative. Policymakers must now grapple with a new category of risks, those tied to the rising geopolitical significance of minerals that underpin an electrified energy infrastructure. And so, what lies ahead? Several plausible futures are taking shape. The first is an escalation of geopolitical competition. As demand for lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements grows, so too will the race to secure access to deposits. This could ignite new tensions in resource-rich regions, exacerbating instability and drawing major powers into conflicts over supply chains and control. A second possibility is technological disruption. Breakthroughs in battery chemistry or alternative storage technologies could eventually reduce reliance on the most problematic minerals. But such developments typically take a decade or more to mature and scale, hardly a quick fix for the pressures facing global markets today. A third scenario envisions the rise of a circular economy, driven by large-scale investments in recycling and reuse infrastructure. This approach could alleviate some of the demand pressure by reclaiming materials from used devices and spent batteries. However, it requires massive upfront capital, innovation, and long-term planning, none of which can be taken for granted. Regardless of which path dominates, one thing is clear. Control over strategic materials is rapidly becoming a core element of national security. Access to these resources will shape not only a country's energy transition, but its place in the emerging global order. States that fail to secure reliable supply chains risk falling behind, economically, technologically, and geopolitically. The coming years will bring a sharper, more visible contest for critical minerals. This competition will shape foreign policy agendas and influence everyday life, from the price of electric vehicles to the availability of smartphones to the stability of national power grids. Just as the 20th century was defined by oil, the 21st century is being defined by strategic metals. And in this new age, those who control the minerals will control the future.